Okay, right. Hello, everyone. So today we are going to talk about movement, exercise, and activity. Now, you may have heard of one of these terms or all three through your training and lifetime. We are going to, first of all, kind of describe those terms and kind of what they actually mean, and how we can manipulate those to help get better outcomes for our patients. So learning kind of objectives today loosely are we're going to try and explore movement, exercise, and activity as an actual technique that we can use. So I think that as a osteopath myself, I think exercise is seen as something else or something that we kind of do that's not really us. But the way in which you prescribe it, I think, can be incredibly osteopathic in its principles and in its thought process. So we're going to explore kind of thinking of it, as a technique rather than just kind of something other sort of health professionals do. So I see it more as a technique rather than advice or something else like that. Okay, and then of course we're going to try and understand those terms and then implement them and give you some ideas on how to actually put them into practice, because it's a lot of theory stuff, and you know, it's great to know the theory, it's great to know the background, but how do we actually use these things in our practices? Okay, so just want to put this a little bit here. So where I've put here, I just want you to realize as well that no one has all the answers. Okay, whenever we're talking about prescribing exercise or activity or movement, no one's got the perfect answer. If they did, then we would all be prescribing the same stuff. But we don't, because there isn't a perfect answer. And it's not a simple equation. You know, it's not yes or no. It's not, oh, well, if this test shows this, then you should do this. It's not that simple. It's very much trial and error. And that's all I think that, you know, we can do really is trial and error. We can try something, see what happens, and then mark down our results. And then we either use that thing again for the same sort of case, or we put it aside for a moment. But even research, that's all it really is. It's just trial and error. Okay, so those are kind of the learning objectives today. Okay, so what's the difference between these three terms? So you've got exercise, movement, and physical activity. So, and who cares? Because you know, if they're all kind of the same thing, why are we bothered? But so these are how I've kind of simplified it and stolen the kind of dictionary definitions. So movement is just a change in position. So that means that just lifting your shoulder is a movement. Turning your head is a movement. Flinching is a movement. You know, moving your top lip or scrunching your nose, that's movement. Okay, that's movement. Exercise, a specific activity performed to develop or maintain a fitness or a skill. So I have a sport and exercise science background as well, as a personal training background, strength coach, that sort of thing. And all you're trying to do really with exercise is you're trying to improve a certain aspect of someone's fitness or health. We would say in a sort of therapist side of things, we're trying to correct something, for want of a better term, or to get people to move in a different way or to use different muscles, which, you know, using certain muscles can be considered a skill. Okay, and then activity is a state of being active. So we can use activity or physical activity. We use the terms today. So yeah, you can be in a state of activity. Now, physical activity, I kind of put alongside activities of daily life. So things like walking your children, picking your kids up, all the cleaning you do around the house, housework, that sort of thing. But it can be many things. Okay, it can be many things. And there is some crossover between these three. Okay, there is some crossovers between these three. So any exercise that you do really can be considered a movement. Okay, can be considered movement. And being active, I mean, is exercise not being active? You know, so there is some crossover between them, but there is some slight nuances. And I'll hopefully tell you a little bit more about those in a moment. Now, just to bring you, or to bring to your awareness, there's a lady called Katie Bowman, and she does a wonderful talk called Move Your DNA, or I think it's her book, can't quite remember now. But she actually goes into the cellular level of explanation of kind of how inactivity and how activity can change your DNA, which I think is fantastic. And she brings a lot more of the research to it. So that's a really wonderful talk to watch. I think it's on YouTube for free, so may as well go and have a look at it. This is just a little side note for me. I hate when people use the word functional exercise, or movement as if it's something special to them, that they invented this kind of functional movement or functional exercise, which is funny because I'm actually a very big exponent of the functional movement screen, which I think is a very good tool. But yeah, I hate whenever people use the word functional because I think it gets misused a lot. Any movement or activity that completes a task is functional, really, and anything that gets you to do that task is functional. So there's kind of a trend in fitness whereby people will talk about functional movement or functional exercises as if they're kind of different to anything else, when really they're not. So yeah, whenever anyone starts to talk about it, it tends to irritate me a little bit. But you've got to be accepting of people, haven't you? Anyway, so what's the problem? So what's the problem we're trying to solve as osteopaths, as chiropractors, physiotherapists, fitness professionals, and all sorts of other stuff? There's huge amounts of people who just aren't moving, right? So they're more sedentary than we used to be. The amount of activity and movement is going down all the time. So Katie Bowman actually makes a brilliant point in that she talks about how now we have cameras in our cars that we don't even move our neck anymore to look over our shoulder to reverse the car, which I think is a fantastic example of how technology seems to be really taken away from our movements. We're not moving the way that we used to, and we're kind of facing the consequences of it with more and more back pain, niggles, and people that we can't seem to fix or sort out, or the people are more overweight than they've ever been, which is multifactorial. It's not just down to not moving as much, it's down to eating as well. But I think being sedentary is a massive part of that, and especially as younger and younger people are getting more and more obese, which is quite scary at times. But we're going to do something about that, hopefully, aren't we? So the amount of activity and exercise we used to do depended on our lifestyle and our job, and it still does, because we used to do a lot, especially now. What I'm kind of talking about the UK and perhaps the US and perhaps Europe as well, certain parts more than others, but we used to do a lot more factory work. We used to do a lot more manual labor, and that's not necessarily true anymore. A lot of us are more office bound. and paperwork and admin, things like that. We don't necessarily lift stuff like we used to, or not as often as we used to. There are obviously still some factory workers, and you do have some people who are in manual labor jobs, builders, you know, plasterers, interior designers, those sorts of things. But the majority of people don't move like we used to. Is that technology? Yes. Is that the jobs that we kind of have in this country now? Yes. Is that lifestyle? You know, are people choosing not to move as much as we used to? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a given. I don't think you can kind of argue those too much. Again, like I say, there's obviously going to be some exceptions. You know, we do still have manual labor jobs, but primarily most people are office based and have to sit down most of the day, or do sit down most of the day. Pain. So this is the problem really, is that people are getting pain. Okay, people are getting pain with being sedentary. And now some of you, again, we kind of talk about people who do have manual labor jobs, and they get pain as well because they do too much, they overload certain tissues, they don't recover enough, all that sort of stuff. But we're going to kind of be talking about the people who don't move more so. So they're getting pains wherever it is, neck, back, shoulder, hip, ankle, wherever the pain is. Now, is that going to be improved with movement and exercise and activity? Possibly, possibly. I definitely think you can use it as a tool to help treat your patients and to help get people moving and to get them feeling better. But it's not necessarily the answer to everything, but movement is essential to the human being, I think. To live a full life, you want to be able to have the most movement capacity possible. So that means you're able to reach your end range of hip flexion or shoulder flexion or neck rotation, whatever it is. If you don't, it sort of starts to limit what you can do, or you have to make compensations. And whenever you make compensations, then you start down that kind of rabbit hole of, well, how many compensations until pain turns up or until something happens that aggravates it, you know? And that's a case that I often see, is that people will move a certain way for years and years and years, and then eventually the tissue just decides that's enough, gets irritated, and then people will say, oh, well, I was only picking up a pencil, or I was reaching for a can of peas or something in the top shelf and my back went, you know. And it's not the actual action of that that's caused it, it's the fact that they've moved the same way for years and years and years, and they haven't had a variety of movement, which I think is often missing from a lot of people. Not just the fact that we don't move as much, I don't think the variety of the movement is there either. So we can use all three of these terms and all three of these techniques to help improve our patients, in my eyes. So exercise can be helped to, or can be used to help pain, relieve pain. So there are certain exercises that help modulate pain, you know, self-myofascial release, things like that. Some forms of stretching can sort of desensitize the nerve slightly, and, you know, all that cool physiology stuff that we all enjoy. But yeah, you can use it to relieve pain, and you can use it to be very specific. So exercise is usually very specific. What are you trying to do? I'm trying to mobilize the thoracic region, for example, because the person has nerve root impingement, and we need to give that nerve a little bit more room to move in that space. Okay, that's a very simple example of what we can do and how specific we can be. We can strengthen. Okay, so we can strengthen with exercise, so we can make something stronger. Okay, which I think is kind of overused in that I don't think it's strength. People's problem is strength, but I would still try and get people stronger because strength is a phenomenal attribute of fitness and something that we use pretty much every day. And when we don't have the strength, we tend to avoid things that require it. So simple things as, you know, lifting bags of shopping up for certain populations, that can be, you know, the hardest thing they do all day. And strength can help make that person's life easier. So exercise is essential. I think that's something that we'd all probably agree on. We all need to exercise. You can use exercise for a number of things. You can use, like I've said, you know, you can use it to relieve pain. You can use it to strengthen. You can use exercise to improve stamina, you know, whether it's cardiovascular health, that can really help and increase your cardiovascular output and your endurance. And that can, again, knock on to kind of heart conditions and CV conditions. You can help improve those or give people the full capacity they have to be able to deal with those things, which, you know, again, is a very sort of osteopathic idea, I think, anyway. Feel free to argue with me. I won't respond. So exercise I see as a very kind of specific intervention, something that you want to accomplish. You use exercise to do that. So like I say, whether it's trying to open up the rib cage, open up the T-spine, whatever. Now, activity can help instill that change that you've made. So whether it's picking up a child or carrying bags, if you give them some new range in terms of range of motion of their thoracic spine, they have more capability and more capacity to use their musculature more effectively. Okay, so you can instill that change that you've made by reinforcing it with activity. So you can say to people, put the exercise before or after your activity in terms of whatever you want to kind of accomplish, but that can help instill the change that you're trying to make with exercise. So this is where I see kind of how all these three come together. Okay, so you can instill the change that you've made with exercise or with your hands-on, you know, with your hands-on techniques. You can instill that with activity. You can, you know, get people to expose themselves to activities that need that new range that you've got with them, or that pain-free motion that you've got with them. So again, walking, of course, is the perfect example. You can release someone's hips, get someone's hips moving a lot better, and then you can get them to walk to keep that change longer than just till the next session. Movement can make people more resilient. So this is a slightly different one in that movement can, again, instill the change that you've made in the clinic, but it can make people more resilient. If you get people to move in different ways, if you add variety to their movement, if you get people to stand up rather than sit down all the time at work when they're working in an office, that can improve the endurance of their tissues, that can increase the movement of the joints, that can sort of grease the groove of the joints better, you know, improve synovial fluid, improve fluid exchange and gas exchange, and all those wonderful physiological changes we can make. But movement's fantastic because it's very easy to add in more movement. So if you've got a desk worker, if you've got someone who sits at a desk, just changing their seated position can make huge difference. So whether they sit with kind of one leg out a little bit further or one knee out a little bit further, or whether they sit with their back right against the chair for 5 minutes and then sit forward of the chair. So if you kind of shuffle yourself to the edge of the chair, you can use movement to really explore those ranges that they've lost due to their kind of inactivity or their lifestyle or job. So, you know, when you are sat down for 8 hours, that means that for 8 hours, your hip is stuck in the same position and maybe only goes a couple of degrees, you know, out of that position. But if you change the way they sit, then you've changed that completely. And that's easy, you know, Pete, that's an easy change to make. That's an easy change to get someone to do. And it can make a huge difference, because if you add it up, you know, if they are moving, you know, every hour now, changing that seated position, you've got a huge amount of time added together, you know, with that little movement every single day for years on end than you had before, you know. So that's what I'm talking about with movement. That's how powerful it can be, in that you can get them to explore these ranges that they're struggling with. And it's not seen as like an exercise. It's not seen as something that they've got to do, something that they've, you know, a chore, or, oh, I've got to do these exercises for the, you know, for the physio or for the osteopath. Oh, you know, I've got to get on my knees, or I've got to, you know, stand against a wall or whatever. You can just adjust it to their kind of lifestyle, which works into kind of the biopsychosocial model as well, because some people really have an adversity to exercise, in that they really don't like it, or they have beliefs or premonitions about it. And this is what we'll kind of move on to next, is that you know, mentality. Some people just think exercise is for, you know, muscle bound, steroid pumped people, or, you know, leotard ballerina look. And there's nothing against ballerinas, but leotarded ballerina people, you know, they have their own views, own beliefs, and they don't necessarily like it. So if that's exercise off the table for the early part, because you can attack that in a couple of different ways. You can say, well, I'm going to educate them about exercise. I'm going to tell them how good it is and how they should be doing it. But, you know, how often does that work? You know, you've got to, in motivational interviewing, we're taught to kind of roll with resistance. And if we integrate the biopsychosocial model into our practice, then we can manipulate movement and physical activity in this way to get to the goal that we want. So whether it's increased hip range of motion, or, you know, strength, or whatever, we can use movement and physical activity to get around that kind of you know, poor beliefs around exercise. So that's one way that exercise on its own doesn't always kind of work. The other one is that, or one of the other ones is that exercise, in terms of how we think of it as classes and set times, it's usually at a higher intensity than movement or physical activity. And it's usually only lasts for an hour, 45 minutes, depending on sort of what type you do. And if we're giving a specific exercise in a clinical setting, you know, what would it take? 5 minutes to do one exercise, something like that. But what that person has been doing the rest of the day has built them into that position that we found them in and that we're trying to get them out of. You know, whether it's an increased kyphosis, or, like I say, short hip range, or, you know, lack of dorsiflexion in the ankle. So regardless of that, you know, if you add that up, 5 minutes of this specific exercise that you're giving them, or 8 hours of being in the same position, in the same shortened position, the 8 hours is always going to win. So this is why we've got to integrate movement and physical activity into, or at least think about integrating it into our programs to help people, because we're missing a big part of the puzzle if we don't include it, in my opinion anyway. So that's what I mean when I say exercise may be a band-aid. You know, it might help for those 5 minutes, but as soon as they go back to their normal sort of lifestyle, they stiffen up and it comes back again. Okay, exercise dogma. So this is something that kind of dogs exercise a lot of the time, is that one, now I've picked Pilates because I'm a Pilates instructor, so I can have a go at it. But you can replace that with whatever you want. You know, oftentimes with my patients, they'll say, oh, well, the doctor said Pilates was good for back pain. And it can be hugely beneficial, but it's how is that exercise given? How is that practiced? And like with all professions, it really depends on the coach or the teacher or practitioner. All are not made equal in that way. And, you know, if you've got someone who has, let's say, extension-based back pain, or extension intolerant based back pain, if they do a Pilates or yoga or whatever class and it's all extension based postures, they're not going to like Pilates or yoga for very long. So those are some of the kind of pitfalls of exercise that we come up against all the time. Now, it's not saying that exercise is bad, it's just saying these are the things that we face when we are prescribing it, or when we say, oh, you know, you should do more exercise. And then again, yeah, going back to the mentality and this biopsychosocial model, some people don't like exercise. Some people don't like that kind of structured, ordered thing of exercising. Why do we need exercise anyway? Yeah, so exercise, I think, has replaced that normal day-to-day activity that we used to have. And, you know, gyms in the way they look today have only looked that way since about the 70s or maybe the 60s. You know, it used to be gyms looked a lot more like gymnastic centers, with kind of ropes, climbing frames, you know, the pommel horse, those sorts of things. Anyone who did school PE back in the 90s will recognize the pommel horse that we sort of the teacher never knew what to do with it. But yeah, a large proportion of this is kind of down to Arnold Schwarzenegger. His kind of his influence has kind of changed fitness in a big way, but there are lots of other ones who have influenced exercise in many ways. But I just wanted to use that as an example, that gyms don't look the way they have for a long time. It's been quite a short time that they've actually looked that way. Again, not saying exercise is bad, just saying these are some of the pitfalls we can come up against. So the benefits. So we've kind of talked about this before. We all know that the exercise is wonderful in that it can build strength, it can build stability, you can gain mobility, you can target cardiovascular performance, endurance, it can help with pain modulation, structure, it can help kind of build structure and change the structure of the body. Mental health, a lot of people find the endorphins released by exercise can really help them mentally, which is fantastic. But again, a lot of people don't. Hormonal balancing, it helps, you know, balance your hormones. It can increase ones that you're low on, blah, blah, blah. All those are incredibly, and that's why we need it. But we can kind of put it in different ways. Physical activity. So yeah, physical activity has, again, all the same sort of benefits, really. It's just that It can be something not seen as exercise, so you don't have that sort of belief structure to counter you or to cut into your clinical outcomes. You know, you can bring in exercise into physical activity and make it part of people's lives rather than then having to feel like they're doing extra. You know, if you build it into physical activity, then it's part of their life anyway. You know, they're going to pick their kids up anyway. So if you say to them, when you pick your child up, try and pick them up 3 times instead of just the once. So pick them up, put them down, pick them up, put them down. That's a way of getting exercise in. So getting that shoulder flexion or getting stronger, whatever you want to kind of aim at, but building it into their life. Okay, so yeah, it can be productive as well. So, you know, the housework, you can try and do that a bit quicker. You can try and do double the housework. You can manipulate, you know, the timing, the volume, all that sort of good stuff. So that's why we should use physical activity, because it can, like I said before, it can instill the changes that we've made on the plinth in the clinic room, but it can also give you those benefits of exercise like cardiovascular health and strength and such. Movement. Now, what are the benefits of movement? Now, obviously, it has the same as kind of exercise and physical activity, but what's good is it doesn't have that stereotyping. So it doesn't have, you know, like I said, the image of this muscular person and, you know, this muscle-bound person that sometimes can have a negative kind of impact with beliefs and structure and things like that. But it's, again, I'm not criticizing people who are muscle bound, I'm just saying that's what we come up against sometimes in the clinic and on the kind of gym floor. It adds up over time. Okay, so this is a huge one. It adds up over time. So small changes over time make a big difference. They're effortless. So movement can be effortless. So rather than someone going, right, I'm going to commit to an hour a week or 3 hours a week or 5 hours a week with specific exercise, you can get them to build in small movements in their day that adds up. Now, again, Katie Bowman makes a great point in that we've kind of forgotten about movement in this way because the calorie burn, for example, is so little sometimes with movement that we kind of think, oh, well, it's not worth it. But again, if you add it up over a day, if you add the calorie burn up over a week, if you add the calorie burn up over a month, it's going to add up eventually. And it can make a big difference. Plus, it's, like I say, it's effortless. You know, people say, oh, well, I can move around in my chair a little bit. That's easier than doing an hour's worth of spin class or whatever. So yeah, easy, adds up over time, and it can have a number of benefits which we've discussed today. So the kind of summary of this is that we need to use all 3 of these things in our practice to improve people and patient outcomes. If we can build all 3 of these into our practice, if we can get, you know, to each level of those where we're increasing people's activity or movement or exercise or all 3, we'll be on to a winner in terms of getting people less sedentary, less overweight, and hopefully less pain as well. Now, of course, it goes the other way when people are moving too much or have got too much stress on and whatever, but that's not really what we kind of talked about today. It's more about getting people to move more and using movement as a way to do that and as a way of kind of introducing changes in an effortless and easy way that will add up over time. Okay, so that's all from me today, and I'd like to thank you all very much for listening. Thank you, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.